Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome to our third in this year in our series. Hang on, let me try and minimize a couple things here. Okay, so I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be a great session. Thanks for joining us. Thank you to our panelists. This is New York City's Coastal Resiliency Initiatives, and we're in our third year of our series with USGBC Middle Atlantic New England region and the Society of American Military Engineers, New York City Post. And my slide is not advancing. Hang on one second. There we go. Okay, we're being recorded. This is most of our planning team in this photo. Thank you to everybody on our joint planning committee. This has been a really wonderful series. And if you missed any of the past webinars, they're recorded, they're on YouTube, and I'm going to provide a link to an article that has all the links to the YouTube sessions at the bottom from this being the third year. And then we have another one coming up in May, and I'll have a slide on that. And we also are going to have a summit, a hybrid summit in October, date and location to be announced. This is my Middle Atlantic and New England team at USGBC, Monique Owens, myself, Medea Vilray, and Rebecca Bentley. And here are our CEU info slides for AIA. This course is approved for 1.5 AIA LUs. And if you provided your AIA number when you registered, we will report these on your behalf. And if you're viewing this live, that is. And I'm also going to send out a survey afterwards. And if you aren't sure if you gave me your number when you registered, you can put your number into the survey and I'll have it that way. And these are just the AIA slides that we're required to show. The course description, the learning objectives. This is for later for the PDHs. If you're interested in PDHs, you'll have to answer the PDH questions in that follow-up survey. So look for that after the session. And I think that is it for now. At the end, I'm going to give you our upcoming events. And I just wanted to say GBCI as well. I forgot the GBCI slide is at the end. So if you are looking for the GBCI credit, again, that's for people viewing live today. And if you gave me the GBCI number when you registered, we'll report those on your behalf. If you did not, you can enter that in the survey. And I'm going to turn it over to Sarah. And Sarah's our moderator today. Thank you. And she's going to introduce our session.
Thank you, Medea. I'm Sarah Cwikla. I'm proud to be part of the planning committee for this resiliency series that we've been doing now for 3 years, as Medea had mentioned. I'm also a vice president at Stantec, and we have with us 4 fantastic panelists today. I'm going to give you some brief bios on them, and I'm going to turn it over to our panelists then to talk about some of the exciting things these folks are doing to protect New York City waterfront. I have some questions then that we'll go through, and then we'll certainly be opening it up to questions from the audience that you can just use through the chat, right, Medea, or should they use another area for questions? It's just the chat.
The chat or the Q&A, either one is fine. We'll be monitoring both.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so first we have Jennifer Cass. Jennifer serves as a senior vice president of the capital program at the New York City EDC, where she leads a diverse portfolio of projects with a mission to drive economic and sustainable growth in the great city of New York. She has over 20 years of experience in the field of civil and environmental engineering. She specializes in the management and construction of large, complex infrastructure and open space projects. Ms. Cass has a mission to drive economic and sustainable growth in the great city of New York, and she holds a bachelor's degree in environmental engineering from RPI and is licensed in New York and California. We also have 2 folks with us from Stantec today. Greg Sprich is a principal with Stantec with over 14 years of experience here. He's managed a multitude of large-scale, complex infrastructure projects, including transit developments, waterfront structures, parks, streetscapes, and plazas. Greg believes that these projects must serve the communities in which they're built and be both resilient and sustainable. We'll talk about the difference between resiliency and sustainability during this panel today. And as a project manager, Greg is known as a trusted advisor for both project teams and clients and is passionate about strategically evaluating how pieces of projects fit together while not losing sight of the long-term objectives. Also from Stantec, we have Donna Walcavage, a principal and landscape architect. She's focused on the planning and design of public realm spaces across New York City. Streetscapes, urban waterfront redevelopment, bikeway and pedestrian facilities, and public open spaces have been key areas to her practice. Donna's advocacy for the profession of landscape architecture as a partner to engineering solutions demonstrated that good design alters the public perception of projects. Her current projects include a shoreline protection plan for Tauntonville, Staten Island, and the East Midtown Greenway, which is currently being built on a new structure outboard of the East River Edge. She's also co-chair of the AIA New York Committee for Design and Reconstruction. And last but not least, we have Nora Madonick, who is the CEO and lead strategist at Art Street. Nora is a seasoned communication strategist who has built her reputation on developing research-based awareness and engagement programs on issues that matter to Americans: energy, transportation, safety, jobs, and the environment. She's Art Street's founder and lead strategist for over 29 years and has delivered project communication and creative marketing strategy to public and private sector initiatives and infrastructure projects. All right, with that, we will get started. And Jenn and Greg, I'm going to ask that the two of you start first here. I know that you both are working together on some really exciting projects, and I'm hoping that you guys can work together to dive into some of the details on those.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with getting the screen up.
Thank you, Greg. So I'm going to start off while Greg's getting the screen up, just by thanking USGBC and SAME for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm looking forward very much to sharing information across the panelists and educating folks on what EDC is doing in our resilience and sustainability portfolio. Thanks, Greg. You can go to the next slide. So I wanted to start off by letting people know that we have developed a sustainability mission statement for the EDC's capital program. For those of you who don't know, EDC has a small capital program of about 35 people, but within that department, we manage about $3 billion of work for the city. All of our projects are within the border of New York City, but we can be doing anything from coastal resilience projects, like we'll talk about, to a library, or we are building a public health lab, as well as new hospitals for the city. So we really have a wide breadth of type of projects that are, so our sustainability and resilience mission statement is intentionally broad to cover that type of portfolio. So it's very general, but what we've done here is laid out 4 items that we are focused on, including reducing greenhouse gas emissions and environmental contamination, reducing waste, energy use, and water consumption, and then at the same time protecting our natural resources. I think this is one that often gets missed in recent times, but we are still seeing wetlands being eroded and wetlands being taken up by development, and we want to protect those. And then lastly, in looking into the resilience component, we want to build infrastructure and structures that are resilient from threats and hazards from a changing climate, as well as any kind of human-caused and natural threats. So that could be storm surge, extreme variation in temperature, and various other things that really, we believe, make a project sustainable. So I'm going to just drill down into the resilience component for a bit here. So our whole goal is looking at risk reduction. You can't build something everyone knows to eliminate risk, but we want to reduce risks. And our focus right now, and you'll see in MOCEJ's goal as well. So overall for the city, the focus is really looking at reducing flooding from increasing precipitation, storm surge, and sea level rise, as well as protection from increasing heat. There's the largest number of deaths from climate change are due to heat. So that is a real concern. And some other considerations, I've just shown some icons on the side. We all know about pandemics now being a risk. Precipitation, we talked about wildfires, which you may not think is a thing in New York City, but yes, they do happen in the outer boroughs. Sun, and we talked about the heat, tides and sea level rise, protests, hurricanes and tornadoes, which also you might think tornadoes don't happen here, but yes, they do. And then fiscal uncertainty. The things that we're trying to look forward to and incorporate into our projects now and going forward are more comprehensive risk evaluations. So not just looking at a single risk for each project or looking at 2 risks for each project, and not just looking at coastal resilience, but looking at multi-hazard risk analysis. So I like to give these examples, when the first few years of COVID, we had situations where we had the worldwide pandemic happening, and at the same time, there were wildfires in California. And how do you protect people in a shelter that are displaced by the wildfire? Similarly, we had several situations in New York City where we had storm events, and we also had a financial crisis due to the pandemic. So everything was just kind of converging at once. How are we addressing these emergency events and protecting from them in the future? So within our resilience portfolio, we're really focused on coastal resilience portfolio. We're focused on 2 things. We have kind of 2 models, and we try to apply this to all of our projects in one way, shape, or form. The circle on the left, we want to build assets that are resilient in and of themselves. The idea that like coastal resilience or resilience means only something that is protecting another asset really doesn't encompass all of our projects. So an example would be, and we're going to go through some of these in the next few slides, would be raising a road, so protecting it from flooding. Another example, we are building a new Coney Island hospital building. That building moves all of the critical equipment out of the flood zone. It's a belt and suspenders, and maybe another pair of suspenders type of system where we have a flood wall around the building. The building is very high tech, so any critical equipment is protected and try to keep it out of the flood zone. The other circle you see on the right is a type of asset that we might build to protect a community from flooding. So Greg is going to focus on LMCR battery, but we have a whole portfolio here that's looking at how to protect Lower Manhattan from flooding again. So that could take many shapes. It could be a berm, it could be a flood wall, many other types of structures, but those are 2 of our prototypes. So I'm going to just touch a bit on our raised shorelines portfolio that we've been working on with Stantec for several years. We conducted a study in 2016 with Moffin and Nickel that looked at the entire coastline of New York City and tried to identify where sea level rise could be causing flooding for the entire shoreline. And we whittled that analysis down to a shorter list of projects, and through more and more analysis, we identified some projects that were occurring in other areas and projects that did not have any kind of coastal or sea level rise protection planned for it. And we identified these 5 project sites that you see on the screen. So we're going to talk today about Travis Avenue and Mott Basin. And it just kind of gives you an overview of the type of projects that you can see through a coastal resilience lens. They're quite different projects, but they are both came out of the study and are, like I said, focused on sea level rise protection. The other thing that's very interesting to me about these two projects, even though we are designing for a future sea level rise, both of these locations experience flooding today. So they are really providing immediate benefit to the community. So this is the Mott Basin location. This is in Jamaica Bay, right on the border of Queens and Nassau County, kind of the southern shore there. So in the blue, you can see the 2050 projected sea level rise that will come and inundate the neighborhood. But like I said, they do experience flooding periodically today, not quite to these extents. So Greg has put together some great slides that show the existing condition and the mean high water. And we're going to progress to show, through the 2050s. And then we get up to a design flood elevation of 6.5 here. And the system that we've worked with Stantec to design here is a berm type of wall. A berm/wall. Excuse me. Thank you, guys. We can go back to the previous slide, actually.
Yeah, I'm having trouble doing that.
We can keep you here that. But we've worked with the City Parks Department. The majority of this project site is on New York City Parks property. And we've worked with them to really create this as an asset to the community. So we're not just building a wall or building a berm that is, protecting the community from coastal flooding, but we're also creating an asset. People can have a walkway here. There's benches, for a nice stroll along the waterfront, and really provide people access to the waterfront here, which right now is not accessible. Okay, then we're just going to talk a little bit about the Travis Avenue location. That's also part of the Race Short Lines project. This is out in Staten Island near the West Shore. Excuse me, getting over a cold. So this project looks, and it is in the middle of a wetland, but there's a road here, and excuse me, like I said earlier, it floods pretty frequently. I think about 10 times a year. This road is not usable. And it is it's a local road, but it is a major shortcut for a lot of the community. You can see the ball fields over there. There's a Trader Joe's on the other side of the road. One of my colleagues actually lives just off to the right of this screen. So there's housing over here. So it's an important road to the city. And it's really been a long road to get this project developed, but it includes a lot of innovative design features. So we wanted to protect the wetland, like I was saying on our first slide, as much as possible, because on either side of the road, there is a very large wetland that is, a huge asset to the city. So by raising the road, we had concerns from the Parks Department that we would not be able to maintain as much flow to the north side. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a drink of water. We wouldn't be able to provide as much flow to the north side of the wetland. So we did some analysis with Stantec and found that by adding these hydraulic culverts, we would be able to maintain a more even flow to either side of the wetland. The other thing that we did was we have added some eco passages for these little orange turtles you see, although they can be used by any kind of critters crossing under the roadway. And we were going to be the first of our the first eco passages in New York City, but I think some were installed out in Queens somewhere already. So these would be the first in Staten Island. And it's really an innovative design. You can see the grate at the top that provides light. So the animals are, you know, kind of welcomed to crawl underneath the road. They're not really enticed by having to crawl through a dark tunnel. But we've heard stories about people having to pull their car over to like pick a turtle up and like usher them to the other side of the road so they don't get hit. And we hope that this is used by various other natural resources as well. And the project is interesting because there's a bridge here, you can see, but we are leaving the bridge in place, but excuse me. We're raising the road on either side of the bridge, and that will bring it out of the flood zone so that we can have a more clear passageway, and it will protect this road in the future from flooding. Thank you. So I'm going to start off by explaining a little bit about our Lower Manhattan Coastal Resilience portfolio. And then Greg is going to go into the details of one of the projects at the Battery that we're working together on. So you can see the extent of this project. Some of you may be familiar with the term the Big U, which was coined after Sandy. So we are kind of the short part of the U from New York City. EDC is actually working on the section from the Battery, the pink area, all the way up to the blue, where the Battery, the Brooklyn Bridge Montgomery Coastal Resilience Project. But we had done a study that looked at this entire area and identified projects that would kind of spin off of that. Over on the west side, you see also Battery Park City Authority is developing a series of coastal resilience projects along the Hudson. And then we're connecting up to the East Side Coastal Resilience Project, which DDC is building. So the way this project has worked is it's very innovative. We developed a master plan that looked at the entire shoreline. And then as certain projects were identified that could be moved forward within the master plan that had less roadblocks, we've pushed them forward. So the first project to come out of the original master plan was the Battery. I'm going to leave that on the side because Greg's going to dig into it quite a bit. And then the second project to come out of that was the Brooklyn Bridge Montgomery Coastal Resilience Project. And they're very different projects. The Battery is a wharf raising project, whereas BMCR, we call it, is actually raising the grade a bit and also providing a series of floodgates. So underneath the FDR over here, there are a series of floodgates that will be installed. Construction is underway. DDC is managing the construction, and that will actually protect this zone from a 500-year storm. And then the next project that will be spun out of that master planning is the Seaport Coastal Resilience. There will be an RFP that soon. Both the Battery and the Seaport Coastal Resilience are addressing sea level rise in 2100. So we've tried to really take a customized approach to each of these projects, or what could be done and what's best for the site and what's best for the community. So we are not raising the waterfront so high that we're cutting off the community from the waterfront, and also doing it in a kind of planned stepped approach. So something will come back later, most likely for the Seaport area, and build up something higher. And that's where the FIDI Seaport master plan is coming through. There's a kind of second phase of this master plan that is focused on the FIDI and the seaport areas. See that on the right. These images are a little outdated for what is being planned here, but you get the gist that there is a huge waterfront reconstruction effort that will happen at some point. So that's all in the master planning phase, and very innovative work happening there. All of these projects are really looking at how we can marry sustainability with resilience. Wanted to just share the timeline in general for the FIDI Seaport Master Plan. This is not a short-term project. This has taken a long time to plan, and it will take a long time to implement. So you see the timeline that we have here is 15 to 20 years. It's going to be a series of projects that come out of this. It's not even one mega project, it's multiple mega projects. And all of this will protect all of the resources we have in Lower Manhattan. Okay, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to Greg. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you. Yeah, so thanks, Jen. Going to talk a little bit about the battery specifically. This is at the lower tip of Manhattan, obviously, as part of that LMCR initiative. And as Jen said, this is a wharf raising project. We are predominantly reconstructing the esplanade and the waterfront structure here at the battery. And as we mentioned at the beginning, you know, this project and all of these LMCR projects are looking at both sustainability and resiliency, and looking at how those come together, and specifically with climate mitigation and preventing future climate change impacts, and climate adaptation, which adapts to climate change impacts, and how those come together for these projects. They're not independent, and they need to be looked. These approaches need to be looked at simultaneously in all of these coastal resiliency projects. Specifically at the battery, we were designing to adapt to sea level rise impacts, in particular sea level rise in year 2100. In this slide, you can see how much impact there is to sea level rise. This is sunny day, high tide in year 2100, and you can see how much that impacts the park and the waterfront esplanade. This is especially problematic as millions of visitors visit this park annually. Many of them depart from the battery to the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island. So similarly, if you look at the wharf in section, and you add 6.3 feet of sea level rise, that's the 2100 projection. You add in wave height and a bit of freeboard. Our new wharf design elevation is about 5 feet higher than it's currently today. And you can see in this cross section, the public berthing vessels in 2100 with an elevated wharf and elevated sea levels is not a problem. However, the wharf must remain operable in today's current levels, which, when you look at this, it presented a major design challenge for the project, because we're designing for the future, but also recognize the importance of accounting for present day operability and livability. And so we couldn't just design for two endpoints of the project, you know, as soon as the project opens and then looking ahead 80 years to 2100, we also needed to consider all of the points in between, as sea levels, you know, theoretically are going to rise gradually. So for the battery, the design solution became a series of ramps down to 2 boat slips at differing elevations. Even in today's condition, both these slips can be utilized based on low or high tides. And then as sea levels rise, vessels will tend to use the higher slip more frequently. And if sea levels rise as predicted, we recognize the lower slip will flood. However, the wharf design allows for this structure to be adaptable and flexible, so that the wharf can be built up to account for those rising sea levels without having to fully rethink or redesign the structure. So that's making our project adaptable and like I said, flexible for the future. So specifically, spoke a little bit about how the project adapted to climate change, but how did the project mitigate against climate change or provide climate mitigation? So we really looked at reducing greenhouse gas emissions by performing a life cycle assessment across all the proposed materials of the project. Simply put, the life cycle assessment means evaluating environmental impact of a product through its entire life cycle. So that's the extraction of the material, the manufacturing, the transportation for how that material gets to the project site, the construction, and to end of life. So at the battery, these 5 materials predominantly make up the project's carbon footprint. So for an infrastructure project like the battery, there's not a lot of flexibility with concrete and steel due to the structural design parameters or our design life to significantly alter the concrete or steel choices. But using our life cycle tool, we really specifically evaluated the 4th most contributing material, that's the lightweight fill. And for many coastal adaptation projects, sites are raised to protect against coastal storm surge or sea level rise impacts. And similarly, many sites on the New York City waterfront have are historic fill sites and have poor geotechnical qualities. And specifically at the battery, we were concerned about settlement implications because we're raising grade 5 feet in this location. So naturally, naturally, the initial thinking is you need to incorporate some sort of lightweight fill. So we selected a very typical, frequently spec'd material of expanded shale. But because we had the life cycle tool, we were able to locate another material with a significantly less embodied carbon in foam glass aggregate. Foam glass aggregate is made of 100% recycled post-consumer recycled glass, and also locally sourced. So we were very happy to find that alternative. And actually, due to the foam glass aggregate properties, we actually reduced the amount of fill needed, which actually reduced the overall excavation on the project. And more importantly, pulled the excavation depth up, and which actually brought the project out of the groundwater table. So that was a great win as well. So altogether, having that tool and that additional data generated from the life cycle assessment, we were able to select the material that reduced the project's embodied carbon footprint. It provided savings to our client and provided a higher level of constructability when working with fluctuating groundwater levels. Oh, and then just the last thing, overall for the project, we were able to specify some low carbon concrete and steel alternatives. And then in addition with the lightweight fill, we actually reduced an overall reduction of 27% in carbon emissions. So for that's actually the equivalent of 10 million miles of cars off the road. So we were pretty proud of the achievements that we had overall with the project. And Jen, you wanted to have this last slide.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the frameworks that we're using and either are required to use or exploring. And for Envision, we are applying that to our infrastructure projects, like such as the battery. The battery is our first Envision project. We're very happy to see that moving forward. But you'll see that in more of our RFPs going out. And then LEED, we are required to use by local law, but we are really trying to apply to any building projects, no matter how small, going forward. And then everyone is aware of a variety of local laws. Maybe you're not aware. I am aware of a variety of local laws and executive orders that have come out recently. And some of those overlap with Envision and LEED, and some of them are, really independent of that, pushing the ball forward. So this sort of makes up, the way that we're framing out our sustainability and resilience work going forward. I think that's our last slide. So thank you.
Yep.
Thank you both so much. What incredible projects already underway, and then things that you have upcoming in the future as well. And as you mentioned, Jen, how incredible that you are making sure that you always connect these to the residents. You're speaking to them, understanding their needs. Like, people didn't want to be having to take turtles off to make sure they're protected. You made sure to incorporate those types of things. But also just the connectivity to open space and to waterfront is just good for the mental health of everybody, especially when living in a city. And that's incorporated in each one of these projects, which is just so important to the overall health and well-being of New Yorkers. So thank you both for all that you're doing and for your presentation. I'm sure we'll have some questions to it later, but we're going to actually go over to Donna now. So Donna, you've worked in New York City your whole career. I would love for you to speak to some of your favorite resiliency projects.
Okay, is my screen sharing the?
Not yet.
Okay. Oh, okay, it's because I didn't share it. I think I'm just not sure what screen.
There you go. It's up.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to talk about a very different location, still within New York City. But, last fall we commemorated the 10 years that have passed since Hurricane Sandy shattered our illusion that New York City was indestructible. And no matter how many, just move this, I don't know if you're seeing my. No matter how many predictions were made by climate and earth scientists, we were still in denial when Sandy struck in 2012. So this is Tottenville, Staten Island, where not only were houses swept off their foundations and many of them just completely demolished by wave action, there was sadly loss of life as well. So after Sandy, we all started learning the alphabet soup of disaster rebuilding funding agencies and governing agencies. And many of them have come to play in this project. The project arose from the New York State Governor's Office of Storm Resilience planning in Staten Island. And this was one of the projects that was put forth from the plan that was developed there. It was to design stone core, sand-capped dunes, including beach access. And when I say that, note that the beach we're going to look at is not a swimming beach. It's to walk, to fish, to dig for oysters. It's not something that's going to attract people from all over New York City. It's really pretty much a local beach. And the reason this area was hit so hard is that if you look between the red dotted line and the water, that is called the Limois zone. So that's another set of initials we learned. And this is a FEMA acronym that shows that it's a line that shows where moderate wave action, which despite the term moderate, really is very destructive. And of course, it's not only is it very destructive, but if your house is within that LIMA zone, you have very high flood insurance rates. And our project aimed to get the community, well, not only to protect the community through risk reduction, but to get it out of that LIMA zone, where hopefully when FEMA looks at the project after it's built, they will move the LIMA line and people will be more able to get flood insurance at a lesser fee. So the project had a very strong community input project, and over the course of this, and this was a companion project to the living breakwaters, which are currently under construction. So the two projects act together to reduce wave action, but they also, there were several other goals: ecological enhancement, which you see in the project, social resilience to allow people to really access this beach and more fully, or really for walks along the edge, on both edges, on the shoreline and the upper level, and as well as attenuating wave energy, addressing shoreline erosion, and actually, you'll see one part is also part of the Raised Shorelines project. And right now, it's designed for a 25-year event, but when you combine the two projects, the living breakwaters, and this one, it will be a higher impact. So part of having the conversations with the community means that this is not what they wanted. We actually designed a structure that would prevent flooding because they asked us to do that. But when they saw what it was going to do to the community, and trust me, it was nicer than these flood walls, they really did not want their view impacted that way. It would also have meant pumping stations would have to be built in this area, and you would have quickly gone right out of any kind of reasonable budget for the project as well. So as I said, the initial plan from GOSER was a sand-capped stone core dune, and this, as you can see, it takes a wide chunk of beach, and we always wanted to stay above mean high water, and so we quickly realized that this wasn't going to work at every area of the beach. And so, in fact, if you look at this, it's the sort of south end of the red line where the dune actually works. And we had this, this was the initial scope of the project, but we quickly realized that the area to the north of the park here was also within the Lima line, and Parks was restoring the maritime forest there, but we also added a berm system through the park that would alleviate the flood risk, the wave damage risk upland from it. And then if you look at the Lima line, it actually after this point, it's no longer within an area that has residences in it. It's in a wetland. There's a wetland behind this park, and then it comes very close to the shore. So those buildings are out of the Lima line. We needed additional funding, and we went to the mayor's office of storm. That was the mayor's office of storm resiliency at the time, and they actually added a piece of that raised shoreline project here, as well as the funding for it. Eventually, we still didn't have enough money, but we did get a federal grant for it. So I'm just going to go through quickly. I realize we're very close to our end time. So these are the various types of structures that we designed in the various places, and I will go through them quickly. These are the living breakwaters that are currently under construction. These are earlier drawings. They've changed configuration many times. So part of the thing that really Parks, who owns this property, wanted out of the project was a way for them to, for vehicles, their little maintenance vehicles, to run through the upper part of the park, so that they, which goes all the way to the very southern tip of the island, so that they could do better maintenance. It was just overgrown in that area and was difficult to manage. So we have that path doubles as access for the community along that back of that project. And we came up with multiple areas. So here you see that earthen berm that I mentioned. And here is a view of what it will look like to walk through the park when that berm is in place. We also found a tidal wetland that was damaged when temporary dunes were placed after Sandy, but I think it had been damaged much before that. And we are restoring that wetland by removing the temporary dune and creating what's called eco revetment, which is a very narrow space for people to, that continues the pathway and allows people to see the renovated or the restored wetland from the path. There's also some places where there is access to the beach. You know, wheelchairs actually can't access the beach except at one point because it's sand. Parks will be bringing out Moby mats in the summer for special programs, so the wheelchairs can move along the beach. This is the area where the dune actually worked. So as you can see, it's about 3 blocks. Where there's also shoreline restoration that's being done by the Living Shoreline Project. And so this is that area where the temporary dune is being removed and the reinforced dune is being added. And that's what it will look like to walk along that path. This cafe, by the way, was almost completely destroyed. Just enough of it stayed there so that they could keep their grandfathered license for having a restaurant at that location. This is again a very narrow area where you also have 2 sewer outfalls in the area at each end of that block. It's the only place where the road was actually built. Surf Avenue was actually built out. We're using some of the right of way to do this project, and we had to provide at one place there is a concrete platform over the sewer outfall, and we've turned this into a plaza for people to use to look at the water. And walking along, this is the other sewer is being protected by the stone paving, and that stone will also allow DEP's trucks to get down there to do maintenance. And the raised shoreline portion goes all the way to the parking, a small parking lot that's used for the park, which will be made accessible. And as I said, this is the area where the Moby mats were put out in summer programs. And as you can see, there's a ramp here to get down to. And these are just some sections of the raised shoreline portion where the changes to the shoreline are very subtle. So and just enough to get that walkway in and to meet the new mean high water requirements. That Greg and Jenn explained very well, so I won't do that too. And again, this is another view of another access from that raised edge. A view along toward the water. And then we've restored, it's all native planting, and we're restoring these different environments within this project all along the way. So I really just want to say that these projects take collaboration among professionals with everything from coastal engineers, structural engineers, landscape architects. We led the project, and I will speak strongly for landscape architects, at least being in the part of the leadership of the project, because we need to find ways to create really great places. We can't design for the last disaster, so we can't go in and clear cut all the trees because we want to build a wall or do something else, because as Jenn pointed out, more people die from extreme heat than all the other natural disasters put together. And then it's really important to have community input. And that is a segue to Nora, who does just that.
Very good. Thank you so much, Donna. So Nora, Donna, if you would stop sharing your screen, and Nora, you can pull up anything that you would like to share, but you've been making sure the communities adjacent to these types of projects that we've been discussing today, that they feel empowered all over the country. Can you provide some examples of some of your successes and what you think that we should be doing with all of these projects moving forward?
I most certainly can, and I'm excited to talk about it. You know, I was watching all of the presenters before me and thinking about the public and listening to all of that technology, which is so important, and thinking about how the public finds itself in that and how it can have a say. What I want to talk about today is the challenge and opportunity around coastal resilience projects, and I'm going to be using a project we're working on now, the Battery Park Coastal Resiliency Project in the Northwest area of Battery Park City, to talk about not only how we're engaging the public, but how public engagement has changed since the pandemic. And it's an important issue that we all have to consider. So coastal resilience projects, they are unusual in several ways, and they require that we have these very high stakes conversations in affected communities. And what do I mean by high stakes? Not only are we talking about projects that are related to safety and related to protection, but we're also talking about projects that affect the way of life for people in those communities. And the decisions that are going to come out of those conversations are in fact going to impact lives and livelihoods. They will require changes in how people live. Some of those changes will be very welcome, and some of those changes may be more of a challenge. What we know about these communities is that they embrace their coastal relationship and they want to be heard. But one of the things that we've learned along the way is that when we invite stakeholders into the process in a fuller way, and we ask them to share what's really important to them about the issues that affect their lives and the situations that affect their lives, we lose a certain amount of control. There's a measure of control that we lose along the way, and it can impact project timelines and project costs and issues like that. This example here is from Battery Park City, a series of open houses where the community came in and shared obviously a great deal of input on any of a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen different ideas. And here's what's happened since the pandemic. The thing that we know happened during the pandemic is that the voice of the community was amplified. The public, because of social media, because of turning to that, became a completely insatiable consumer of information. The expectations changed for information, and they stay with us. Social media became the town square. We know that percentages, 14% of Americans acknowledge that they changed their mind about an issue because of something that they saw on social media. We also know, I mean, we're still doing it today. There's a bot or a retail, online retail. You can get something delivered, well, in an hour or two. And what that has done to public engagement in these projects is that it has created an expectation for immediate information, fast response. All of that is at an all-time high. There's no going back. This is where we are, and this is where we have to fall forward in this. Where we might have been in public engagement 5-7 years ago, where perhaps there were public meetings and there was a table at the front with a panel and there was an audience, and we were mostly doing push communication. People want much more engagement at this point. And people are quick to express themselves. I mean, social media, people respond boom, boom, boom like that, and they can be ferocious in their comments. They expect that real-time response around engagement, and they expect to be able to participate from wherever they are. But what they want to be sure of is that whether they participate in person, they participate online, their input is treated equitably. So we have to make sure for that. And they scrutinize our processes at a level that perhaps is new. They look for transparency and equity, and they are certainly happy to let us know when they see a sort of crack in them. Communities want to drive the narrative now. They want to co-create. They favor locally informed and inclusive processes. And all of that sounds good, but as you heard from the prior group of speakers, there's a lot of technical information to be addressed along the way. This series of workshops was ended very recently, like within a couple of weeks of now. And these workshops were unusual in that they took the coastline for Battery Park City in chunks, invited people in and randomly seated them at tables with project team to talk about some of the options that were out there and to share their ideas and to share their input. So you had 10 people who might have seen each other on the street or maybe own a store or maybe have a business, but they'd never sat down together. And one of the things that we've seen, there's a lot of passion around coastal projects. There's a lot of opinion around coastal projects. But with any new tactic that we try like this, there's always a surprise. You know, we never walk away saying, well, that went just as expected. So what was the surprise here? The surprise here was that we had these random tables of people together. And so we had someone who was a senior citizen talking with someone who's a graduate student, talking with someone who's a parent of young children, talking with someone who is disabled. And suddenly they had to work together to come to compromise and to come to agreement on things that perhaps in a standard public engagement setting might not have happened. So that was a great surprise of these kinds of meetings. But public engagement around coastal resilience is different than public engagement around a road widening, say, or a bridge construction, say, because there is so much technical information, and that's what we were just hearing. And somehow or another, we have to understand that public engagement for coastal resiliency projects has to be as much about education as it is about engagement in order for the participation to be meaningful. And I'm just going to share a couple of things that we found along the way. There's something called mycoast.org, which has a New York component where people can upload selfie photos that they take of storms and sea level rise and other issues related to coastal resilience. And then the portal pulls out technical data around that. So what happens here? The community becomes part of a community-wide science project. And when they do that, they suddenly are engaged at a different level and they start to understand the depth of what we're talking about. This is another way that we have used to engage, and here we used lesson planning and created a whole bunch of curricula that were used in schools. This was around the Tappan Zee Bridge, later to become the Mario Cuomo Bridge, where students collected quantitative data and then translated that into learning about examples of development and creating a debate platform. And they supported their points of view with the data they collected, and all of this information went home. So we were, the walls of the classroom came down and they extended to the living room. We may be past the COVID pandemic, but we have a new pandemic, and that's a pandemic of loneliness. People want to be together again. It's documented and people are very well aware of it. What we have done at Northwest Battery Park City at this project with the support of BPCA, Battery Park City Authority, they have taken a very bold and courageous position in trying new things to engage communities in talking about issues around sea level rise and what that might mean for the community and where we need to go. We took advantage of the desire people had to be together again to create a series of what we call workshops. And the workshops became so popular that we had to repeat them. We had to repeat them at night. We had to repeat them on Saturdays. We had to repeat them over and over again. Because what happened here is that, again, you had people who may pass each other in the night, but don't really spend time talking with each other, spending a day together or a few hours together, walking with the project team to learn about the environment that they live in, what's happening with sea level rise, getting out of that sort of very stiff public engagement meeting and coming into getting their feet, putting their feet on the ground and taking a walk together, discussing with the project team, what does this mean? What does this mean to me? What does it look like? And for many of them, for the very first time, we had aha moments at every one of these. We used a tool. There's a project member to the left here. That's Garrett Avery, and he invented this tool, which is simply a string of PVC piping with duct tape in different colors all the way around. And as we walked from a higher elevation down to the coastline, people could see literally the change in the sea level rise. And you could see the light bulbs going on, in all of the people who were walking. It's an important moment when people can start to really have conversations about this. They're not going to have the years of science behind them, but they certainly can be brought forward to be able to embrace some of this information and then use it in contributing into this. But you have to remember that there is a contingent of people, there's a large group of people that don't want to meet in person. They don't want to show up in person, or they can't. And so you have to make sure that there is a way for everyone to have their say. And here we used an online tool. We used something called Miro to set up breakout rooms with whiteboards, and essentially went on the same walk for those who wanted to participate from home. We think that there is a tremendous opportunity in the coastal resilience work that is happening in Battery Park City and then all the way up the coastline in that big U area and elsewhere, to reconnect communities, to connect them around a shared issue, one that we have to solve, and through that to increase confidence in the outcomes. It's important because the more voices that we hear, the better the outcome will be. And so with that, Sarah, I moved pretty quickly because I know we're a little shy on time, so I wanted to pass things back to you.
Thank you so much, Nora. Thank you, all of you. We do still have time for some questions. I have my own based on all the wonderful things you shared, but we will go first to our Q&A here, and I hopefully that some of you were able to look at this while others were presenting. So the first would be for Greg and Jen. What was the tool called that helped identify the alternate material foamed glass aggregate? Jen or Greg, one of you?
I think that's what that one's for
Yeah,
you.
no, sorry, couldn't find my mouse to off mute. So sorry about that. Yeah, thanks for that question. The answer is a brief, I guess. So essentially, we had a very robust Excel sheet that grabbed information from Athena and publicly available data on product EPDs or environmental product declarations. We used that spreadsheet to establish the baseline for the project. And then, as I showed in that graph, we identified what are the most contributing materials were, which obviously in this case was precast concrete, cast in place concrete, steel, and I talked about the lightweight fill, and looked at how we could reduce those four materials footprint as much as possible. So for the concretes, it was via a performance spec that identified a maximum GWP target for those concretes. For steel, not a whole lot of flexibility there, although in the upland areas or non-structural concrete, we were able to use a glass polymer steel rebar, and then I spoke about the lightweight fill. But yes, the short answer there is Athena and a robust spreadsheet built by our engineers.
Thank you, Greg. This one might be for you, Jen. Are there any incentives from the state for material innovation or cost savings?
Yeah, I saw that question. I'm not sure if there are, because most of our projects did not include state funding. So I know there was a low carbon concrete law in the works from New York State, but I don't believe that has passed yet. So that's the only one that I'm aware of. I think it would probably be by agency basis.
Great, thank you, Jen. And then the other question here is, what tool was used for your LCA, your life cycle assessment?
Well, that's the one I just did with Athena and our
Oh,
spreadsheets.
yes, you used Athena, right, understood.
But so there was a quick follow-up from about buoyancy and the foam glass aggregate. Yes, buoyancy was looked at. That's why we couldn't completely change the material from expanded shale to the foamed glass. It actually needed to be layered beneath the expanded shale because it's heavier. And then, of course, the topping of the pavers and any base. So yeah, buoyancy was looked at.
Thank you. Jen, you had mentioned at the end these local laws that New York City has. How protective are those local laws, and is planning being done for sea rise level beyond 2100?
Yeah, I think there were a few questions on local laws, so I can answer them together.
That would be great. Yeah, the next one was about including New York State environmental regs and permitting, and what about federal laws such as NEPA compliance?
Yeah, I had put in one of the answers a list of the local laws I was referring to, but I think it's not everyone can see them, so I'll just explain a few.
I can put them in the chat too.
Okay. So in terms of like how protective they are, I think they're pretty progressive, especially on the sustainability front. On the resilience side, as Robert Holo from DOB had mentioned, there is a plan to develop a waterfront construction code, but the DOB code right now does have requirements for protection of structures within the floodplain in Appendix G. The sustainability laws that I was referring to, just to mention a few, there's local law 86 and 3132 that require buildings that have city capital funding to be LEED. Now they are requiring them to be LEED Gold. Local Law 97, for anyone that's not familiar, applies primarily to commercial buildings. And that is really pushing the boundaries of operational energy for buildings and reducing the energy footprint. So those are a few that I wanted to mention. John Hayes had asked about to local law. Did I mean local laws to include New York State environmental regulations? No, I'm really talking about New York City local laws. But you know, New York State, I know Kathy Hochul has her sustainability agenda, so we'll see some things coming out of them. But for the projects that we discussed today, Greg and I discussed today, they have gone through the environmental permitting as well as environmental review process, but the projects that we talked about, race shorelines and the LMCR project are under the city seeker, not the federal NEPA law, because they are not federally funded. But I'm sure Donna and Nora and Greg and I have all gone through the NEPA process and other projects as well.
Greg, here's a question with regards to Battery Park. What will happen to the gardens at Battery Park, specifically the existing trees and urban farm?
Yeah, sure. Without pulling up our proposed plans, I obviously didn't speak about all the great landscape architecture work that the project's doing. But specifically to answer the question, the project site's really, and the construction is really a wharf reconstruction project. The wharf is deteriorating, it's in critical condition. And we're, as I was mentioning in the presentation, reconstructing that wharf to a 5-year elevation, 5 feet higher elevation. So we're really pushing to keep the footprint as narrow as possible for the project so that existing trees are not impacted. The urban farm, of course, much further inland would not be impacted. And really, like I said, keeping that footprint as narrow as possible and limiting as many impacts, really with all the historic cultural resources, existing trees that are present in Battery Park.
I just wanted to add, Greg, that you know, one of the goals of the project, to the reason that we're raising the wharf, is to protect the park from sea level rise. So that includes the trees, because during Sandy, the park was inundated and a lot of the trees had salt damage. So we really want to try to prevent that. Besides the flooding, you know, we want to protect the resources in the park.
Absolutely.
I don't see any other Q&A in the chat, unless Medea, I'm missing something. Oh, I'm sorry, there is another one we just got. Could you expand a bit on the relationship between resilience and sustainability? And actually, that was going to be one of my questions. You talked also a bit about adaptability, Greg, within the Battery Park and that project, but what is the relationship between resilience and sustainability? For instance, can't there be contradictions when the city needs to reduce footprint, but also to strengthen its infrastructure and protection? Does resilience is included into the choice of materials, for instance? So if you want to read that question again, it's the last one in our Q&A.
Yeah,
but
you can start off, Greg, if you want to, and then you can piggyback.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. We're aligned in this one. Most things, but so you know, you can have a resilience project that is not sustainable, but like I was saying to Greg the other day, actually, like, you in this day and age, you really can't. You cannot be building a project that is protecting a community from climate change while you are causing climate change. There may be some impact, but we really feel that it's imperative to have the relationship between the two things back and forth. Similarly, if you build a project that is not resilient and it falls down or needs to be replaced in a shorter time frame than the intended life cycle, it is not sustainable because you have just pumped all of this carbon and materials into a project that needs to be rebuilt. So that's where our perspective is on the relationship between the two. In terms of like the footprint, yeah, like site selection is really important to make sure you are not building in you know, a green field. We don't have many of those in New York City, but anything that we do have that's green, we're usually trying to improve it, like, you know, if it's become a dumping site or something like that.
Right, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Nothing to add there. I like the analogy that Jenn laid out.
Well, I once co-authored a paper called Resilience versus Sustainability, Conflict, Coexistence, and Collaboration. So really, it is how the projects are done, what you're protecting, and you really need to think it all through very well. But there isn't one of the essential issues that you have to deal with is the fact that when you are designing something to be resilient, it is usually heavier, taking out more materials, etc. So that is, you know, a step away from sustainability. So it makes it more imperative that you do an analysis like Greg showed to make sure that those additions to the load of non-sustainable sustainability are kept to a minimum.
I have a question that I think each of you could end up responding to, but, you know, we've talked a lot about what we do to engage and to listen to the public in the beginning of the project to make sure that those aspects are incorporated. But what are we doing through some of these projects to use them as learning tools for the future when people are navigating these now beautiful open spaces? Is there an education component that will move forward with these projects? And I allow anyone who wants to jump in there first, go ahead.
I could start on this and then kick it back to everybody else, but I think part of it goes back to the question that you just raised about sustainability and resilience, because I think there's a lot of confusion for the public around that. There's a lot of use of language that doesn't really that doesn't have a lot of clarity, and the public is looking for projects that have, you know, that these projects are going to change things for people and they don't want to have to go back and do it again. There's an opportunity to educate people over the long term, because these, you know, we may be addressing some of the issues and mitigating them, but we're not changing the fact that there's going to be sea level rise. And so this conversation is going to continue. You know, an educated public is probably our best asset in moving these forward.
In Tottenville, in the living breakwaters and the shoreline protection plan, a great deal, I mean, especially coming out of the Living Shorelines project, a great deal of that project scope was a continued education process for the community. And that was maybe even harder to permit than anything else, because we ended up with not being able to build a building, not being able to actually, at one point there was the idea that you would have a boat that was outfitted as an educational center. That didn't happen. And even down to some interpretive signs on the walkway, on the land part of the walkway, to interpret what both projects were doing became extremely minimal. So it went from being a really generous program to being one that was just a very limited program. But but they are developing curricula for the schools, and the schools were involved all the way through. So presumably the at least the school curriculum will continue. And it's also tied in with the Building Oyster project as a sponsor. So that will also continue education.
Thank you all. And I do have one other question for you, and then maybe we'll close it up here because we're getting close to our 1:30. We've talked a lot about design and what we do to engage the community with design aspects, but what about the actual construction aspects when these are being built? How do you incorporate some of those into what you're doing, or is there any changes that you've seen in your design that were changed because you realized the construction aspect wouldn't be too invasive to the community? Anyone?
No, I think we've changed like midstream during construction. Usually we're really trying to plan that ahead of time. And that's really a key part of Envision, is looking at the community impacts during construction, whether that's noise related or traffic, air emissions, and trying to mitigate those before they happen. And that's also part of the environmental review process. But I'm trying to think of an example where we might have changed something during construction, but usually we're trying to mitigate that.
Well, it does sound like, and Greg mentioned that Envision framework for Battery Park. And that sounds like you just mentioned that probably incorporates some of that. So that's fantastic. I don't know if Greg, if you want to speak any more to the Envision framework and where else you might be using it, or just, I think you already spoke to it a bit on Battery Park, but or the battery.
Yeah, I mean, we touched on it really briefly, but the battery project used the Envision framework from its planning and design, and now we're moving into the bidding and construction phases of the project, which those requirements will all be embedded into the construction, so that when you submit for, our project is submitting for a platinum certification, which is very exciting from the endpoint of design. But then at the end of construction closeout, the contractor is responsible for collecting those tickets, making sure there's tracking, following our waste management protocol spec, adhering to the low carbon concrete requirements, and the other initiatives that has to follow through the construction process, through closeout, to then actually become the certified project, and stamp that certification at the end of the job. So yes, Envision framework does carry all the way through construction and closeout.
And I think too that public engagement has to carry all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
Because it changes. I mean, construction communications is different than planning communications, but hearing from the community about how they navigate their day can impact how you map your construction planning, and they want to be part of that conversation as well. I mean, I think leaving time for that is a really important piece of it.
Absolutely. I think that covers all of our Q&A as well. Thank you to our panelists so much for joining us today, and thank you for all that you do to protect and engage New Yorkers. And we're just going to see more and more of these projects moving forward, which is scary and exciting, I suppose, at the same time. But it really is fantastic to see how much the community is engaged and how much we are creating this beautiful public space for New Yorkers too, which I think everyone always is drawn to. So really exciting work, and certainly a lot more to come from what you mentioned too, Jenn, with some of the other things that EDC is putting out soon. So maybe we'll have you all back next year to talk about where some of those projects are. So thank you again very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Medea, do you have any closing words, or is that it?
Yes, I just wanted to share a couple more slides very, very quickly for anyone who's interested in the CEUs. Here we go.
Medea, we can't hear you very well, just so you know.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. My camera kind of sets out, but so our speakers, our GBCI information. If you provided your GBCI and AIA numbers, we will report on your behalf for live viewers. And if you don't know if I have your numbers, look for the follow-up survey and you can enter them there. And if you're seeking a PDH credits, Also, you must answer the last 4 questions on that survey. So I'll be sending that out shortly. We have
Medea,
about-
I'm gonna repeat, because I think I heard what you said, but others, I don't think others can hear you. So we're speaking about the credits right now and making sure that you answer those last 4 questions in order to get your credits.
Yes, thank you very much. And then, and I put these links to the upcoming events in the chat. And thank you again to our speakers. Thank you, Sarah. Everyone was wonderful.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being here. And yes, May 10th is our next one. We will have some folks speaking about HATS, the Harbors and Tributary Study. You actually probably saw on the top of Jennifer's map early on where that project starts taking over. So we'll be speaking a bit to the close of the public comment period on there. We'll have some folks from the Army Corps and from the consulting agencies that are working on that to talk about what the future of that project is going to look like. So, and me moderating again. So look for that on May 10th. Thank you all again for joining, and enjoy your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks,
now.
everyone. Take care.